Now, typically, and clearly we're going to have to simplify a little bit, but large institutional investors would often tend to overlook a place like Brussels. Brussels is often perceived as a monofunctional city dominated by the European institutions and driven by long leases to those same institutions. Brussels is not perceived as a dynamic market, and what do we mean with a dynamic market? Well, if you look at London, London is a dynamic market for two reasons. It's got a wide economic base, and it's also very cyclical. So whether you like it or not, the cyclical market is actually good for real estate investment because it attracts the whole spectrum of real estate investors from opportunistic all the way to core and core plus. So added value or institutional, international added value investors that are looking at Brussels can't see a lot of cyclicity, can't see a lot of rental growth. So most investors internationally that are looking at Brussels are looking at only for its core characteristics. But it shuts out all these added value investors and therefore makes Brussels perceived as being a less dynamic market. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no added value investment opportunities in Brussels, but they're usually dominated by either local ones or those international ones that have a local presence like Rockspring. And so the added value opportunities in Brussels are primarily driven by redevelopment or repositioning, and you need a local presence to be able to do that. The GICs of the world are not going to have a local presence in Brussels because it's still a little too small. Yeah? So that's sort of the reality check today. But I believe the upside is still huge in Brussels and not being marketed or not being capitalized sufficiently. If you look at Brussels, Brussels typically is always ranked in the top 25 cities worldwide in terms of its competitiveness and its clout. The IBM index ranks Brussels number 13 in the world, AT Kearney number 12. Brussels, as we all know, is the second largest conference center in the world. It's got more diplomats than Washington. It has the world's second largest number of journalists. But these are elements that are not necessarily contributing to making Brussels an attractive town, partly because Brussels is probably not marketing itself enough on that front. But that is definitely something that Brussels can capitalize on. The hopeful thing, however, about Brussels is if you look at the Jones Lang LaSalle City Momentum Index, it ranks the European cities in terms of its dynamism. And Brussels, together with Vienna and Madrid, are ranked as the cities that offer the highest growth potential because of a renewed dynamism. And for those of you who are coming from abroad, hopefully you will see here in Realty a lot of initiatives being taken both by the public sector and the private sector. The public sector has developed a lot of incubators in two sectors which Brussels is very strong in, life science and circular economy. And the private sector is developing a lot of initiatives along the canal zone here, which is a huge redevelopment opportunity. And last but not least, and I'll finish here, for me the largest untapped potential in Brussels is its population. According to the International Organization of Migration, Brussels is the world's second largest, most diverse city in the world, with 62% of its population that was born outside of Belgium. Now, a lot of reports demonstrate that a diverse population is a huge contributor to creativity and innovation. Why is that? Because from an evolutionary point of view, people living in a diverse society need to constantly adapt to each other, and the capacity to adapt is the best element for survival and for development and growth. Now, despite that huge foreign-born population in Brussels, it is known that most of them come from the European Union, but tend to live in bubbles and tend to not integrate properly in the Brussels society. However, a lot of these bureaucrats, as they refer to, have their children born in Belgium also, but they tend to be sort of educated in the so-called European schools. If there was a concerted and active approach from the Brussels authorities and the public sector to make a real effort to capitalize on that human capital, to integrate these people better, we would have an extremely, potentially extremely active, dynamic, creative, innovative town, which would then broaden the economic base of Brussels, which would then be conducive to a more dynamic real estate environment and then attract more investment. So I believe that historically Brussels has punched below its weight, but it has the potential of punching much beyond its weight if it were to capitalize on all the strengths I've identified. And then hopefully the GICs of the world will start perceiving Brussels beyond its European capital dimension and see the underlying dynamic that is growing. And according to the JLL City Momentum Index, this is happening. So now it's up to us, the real estate sector, but also the public sector, to make it happen and communicate it primarily.